Josh Neighbors, Big 12 Watch, joins us now on 365 Sports.
Sure, he has thoughts on this.
Over on Crystal Ball College Football. Josh, it's just, and the only reason I addressed that comment in the chat is I feel like I have to snuff that out anytime I can because it's one of my biggest pet peeves of like, oh, well, Notre Dame is definitely going to join the league. Like, why would they when you don't have to and their AD has the same exact amount of power in charge of one school as Mike Slive or Jim Phillips, Greg Sankey.
Nice.
Yeah. Brett Yormark does over multiple teams.
Yeah, it doesn't make much sense. Like, whenever you read the articles, it's always everybody and then Jack Swarbrick. It's like he is the AD. He's for one school. It is one school. It's funny too to watch Notre Dame. And like I enjoy watching the Golden Domes, the helmets. It's cool when Notre Dame's involved in a big game. Like this year's Ohio State game never gets old. But it is strange, and it's like, why would you give that up? And also, maybe you can, but like, can you put a price on the fact that you've got this level of can you put a price on that, like of influence? The fact that you are at the same table as like 12, other schools, and now it's 16 other schools, as much of a commissioner of, however many schools. Yeah, it's only one, and yes, a dollar for dollar basis, like, I guess big picture, not as much, but they're still getting as much control and also attention as you could want, despite the fact that, hey, yeah, they're good. And I think Marcus Freeman's actually a pretty decent coach. I think he'll learn to be a better in-game coach. But the fact your program gets this much influence over what's happening, and you're just one program, why in the world would you give that up?
Yeah, and I appreciate, again, what was his name? Jackson?
Jackson.
I appreciate Jackson for throwing that in there. I mean, we're willing to talk about just about anything, but I think that we've kind of all come to the same sort of place when it comes to Notre Dame and they get brought up. My thing with them, as much as anything else, Josh, is you're special being by yourself. Like, I don't care how cool or golden your helmets are or how great your tradition is. If you go join a conference, you're just like everybody else. Now, you may be on a tier above Northwestern if you join the Big Ten and right there next to Ohio State, but you're not going to be above anybody the way that you kind of are above people, at least as far as your influence and your power that you have now. That's always been my biggest hang up, is that independence and that being as big on your own and not just folded into another league where you kind of just become another team. I think that's priceless in comparison to being able to throw a badge on your chest that says one of the two big conferences.
Well, it's funny too, because like the SEC just means more, right? So like that's their slogan. They think they're better than everybody else in like a competition sense. The Big Ten has this combo. I guess it's the Big Ten makes more money because like their brands are just kind of bigger, and they do have an arrogance.
Cities, history.
Yeah. And there is an arrogance about the Big Ten. It's like the combo of academics and athletics that, just can't be beat. And so like, I almost feel like it's too much butting of heads. I just, I guess the big question is there a dollar figure that Big Ten schools could make or whatever a Super League could make where it's like, okay, now we have to throw our lot in, or you have to join a conference to be a part of this, whatever. Does that happen? I mean, I don't know, not in the room for these things. We speculate about them, but like, is there a certain price for the freedom? Right. What is the price of freedom for Notre Dame? And right now, I actually don't feel like we're anywhere close because they seem pretty happy with where they're at. I mean, just very, very pleased with where they're at financially. And I think financially, but I think number one is their influence, because their influence, to be honest, while financially they might not be as great and still pretty good, their influence has never been greater. I mean, you can't argue that. Because their influence right now, they have just as much say as an entire conference, of teams has on some level. So, like, what is the price for that for Notre Dame? Maybe there is a number, but I think for them,
I will say in regards to them,
stay on your own.
Yeah, I will say in regards to them that one thing that could force their hand would be that lawsuit that they just had from the National Labor Board directed at them specifically. Now, if there's to be a certain determination there that things have to change as far as like everything else, amateurism and things like that, that could be a situation that I think Notre Dame could be kind of squeezed a little bit. But beyond that, I think that all the reasons we listed are why they would stay status quo. Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Josh, what did you think about Brett Yormark yesterday? I mean, look, he told us a lot of these things when we had him on at Big 12 Pro Day, but just kind of, in general, what he had to say about the Big Ten and the SEC partnership and, the money and all those things.
Yeah, I mean, the SEC and Big Ten, they are the hammer, right? So, your job is to advocate for the conference. So I appreciate his idea of looking at, and honestly, I think for the most part, it's pretty dumb for anybody to sign anything long term. Like, we've all kind of lambasted the ACC for their long TV contract, right? So anything long term is not the way to go, just because everything is changing so fast. And the amount of money that donors are investing in certain schools for NIL and whatnot, the status of NIL as it relates to employment for athletes is up in the air, right? I mean, are they going to become, employees? What does that look like? How much are they getting? Well, all of those questions are kind of looming over this entire conversation right now. So it's smart for Brett Yormark to advocate and say for the look in, but once, I think he understands that, at the poker table, he is not holding the best hand, although I think he does feel like with the kind of success that he's had that he might be the best poker player, but he might not have the best hand is kind of the way that I would put this. So always advocating, but I think there is a realization, and I think maybe downplaying how good the Big Ten and how strong that partnership is. It may actually play into what I just mentioned, like the whole, there is some contrast between, hey, the SEC just means more, the Big Ten, we're making more money than you. So, how much more does it mean on that front? So they're all playing poker to some extent, right? I mean, the worst poker player that we all know is George Kliavkoff. And there's a reason why, the final table does not include George Kliavkoff at this point in time. So I think he is pretty confident in his negotiating skills, but I think he's pretty aware of the hand that he has. So good to advocate for a look in, things of that nature. The Big 12 is surviving. It's got enough teams, if a voting block, if you will, to still be meaningful, enough brands, right? I mean, we're still, people forget pretty quickly nowadays, but once again, TCU was in the national championship game and did beat this year's national champion Michigan in a playoff game less than 2 years ago. So the Big 12 still has some cards to play on that front, but when it comes to the brands, they're not quite as strong. So I think always angling to make sure that your position is the number 3. And look, we're not talking about the ACC or the Big 12's collapse. You all just mentioned, hey, there's a chance the ACC still stays together, right? But the ACC is the conference now on the ropes in some ways. So the Big 12 it still feels like, from a stability standpoint, they are number 3. But let's talk about total value. I guess you could say, hey, they could be number 4. And I think they're making like a little bit less per team, wherever it is, from the new CFP contract. So he's playing chess, playing poker, whatever analogy you want to use. So I think he's barking up the right tree. And then obviously, he, whatever his thoughts are about basketball and the NCAA tournament expansion, it's good to advocate for that, because more Big 12 teams will get in, right, just because the net ratings, just like they basically will dictate, in some way, shape or form, the Big 12 net ratings are going to stay really strong. And so you should want more teams in when it comes to the NCAA tournament. But as far as CFP goes, I think he knows what he's got. He knows what he has here. And I think this is the right tack to take. Hey, I'm skeptical about, a long-term future, and there should be a look in, and downplay a little bit the Big Ten and SEC, but the Big Ten and SEC, they're not super, super concerned, in my opinion, about those comments that he made. It's not like they're earth chattering for them or whatever. Then they understand that, why he said what he did. So I think it's the right tack to take. Slight aggression, but not aggressive enough to rustle too many feathers.
Yeah, I mean, politically, it's the right move. You don't need to ruffle feathers. You're in a really sweet spot right now, and I feel like there's this sentiment, and maybe it's the minority, but like he needs to call every bluff, and it's like, no, he doesn't. He needs to play the hand that he's dealt and play it smartly. And right now, they're in a really good spot. So why sit there and try to bark up a tree that you're not going to be able to climb? I mean, I think people need to be realistic about where they are and where they're going to be at best, and they can be greater than they are, but you're not going to sit there and just challenge the SEC and Big Ten over every little thing because you want to be tough. That's the dumb move. Sometimes you just got to wait patiently, kind of like we saw, I don't know, them do all of last year when it came to the realignment phase.
And they got the assist from the Big Ten, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Big Ten ultimately was the ones who swung it, right? That meeting happened. It sounds like the Pac-12 staying together, and the Big Ten came in and said, "All right, Oregon, Washington, come on over for less, right now, and then long term we'll take care of you." But like that's kind of you have to go with the tide, but you can posture a bit higher than the tide, I guess you could say. That's the right way to do it. And also, it's funny because what's taking the oxygen right now is, in terms of Big 12 storylines, is actually the Colorado stuff, in my opinion, right now. Like that's been a bigger story.
Yeah.
Than all this. So, kind of let Deion, take that air, and you can come up with your own jabs. And the folks like us who pay attention to this, I think are thinking about that. But this is kind of the downturn for college football, at least at this moment in time. So, right tact to take, right position, and everything. And I mean, look, he acknowledged he's not the biggest college football guy. So I think, with all of that in mind, like he's not taking the massive stance. I'm not going to, take, as much oxygen away as everything else. And I think he's got the right messaging in mind, in my opinion.
Do you think that he trusts the Big Ten and SEC, even though he says things are great?
So no, he doesn't trust them, but I think at this point he has to trust the fact that the Big Ten and SEC, they cannot break away. They cannot do the 40-team league because the risk at this point is way too high. Like nobody is making a high risk move. What's the last big risk that a college administrator took? Like, I mean, and I want you all to kind of actually answer this question, not rhetorical. Like, what's the big swing that somebody took as of late where we're like, that's a big gamble? It's
Big 12 Mexico.
Right. And guess what? That's on hold.
Yeah, it's on hold. Yeah.
That's on hold right now. So the big swings, kind of few and far between, right now.
All good.
You're gonna make
we all
it,
get
Josh?
choked up thinking about how that Kansas-Houston game in like Cancun would have been magical.
Guys, I did 7 hours of radio tonight, so I'm a little bit.
Been there.
Oh, wow.
My voice is not as strong right now as it normally is.
Oh yeah, we've both been there.
Well, before it winds down, yeah, we've both been there. Definitely have had some of those types of days. You mentioned it. Let's get your thoughts on Deion and Colorado. Enough Big 12 and Yormark. What are your? I mean, everybody's got opinions on this. We had Max Olson. I mean, he's at the root of the storm. Although he wrote a great article and shouldn't be getting really any flack at all for what he wrote about. But obviously, Deion and that program are. Right there in the epicenter of college football discussion right now, and really since he's arrived. So I think it's going to be a huge boon, especially if they can win for the league because of the ratings and things that it'll bring. In either way, it's going to bring up a lot of attention. But what do you just make of this current, controversy, if you will?
He's not here for a good time or a long time. He's here for a good time.
Right,
it feels like, right? I mean, you look at the transfer numbers and look, I think about Michigan State and the one big season they had, right? With all the transfers. Mel Tucker would have kept his job most likely, whatever you want to say about that situation, if they were good enough, consistently. I think he keeps his job, but they were not good enough consistently for him to keep his job. And that's kind of what Deion's doing here. His recruiting classes aren't big. It does not feel like they're and especially the way they treated coaches, they're not developing talent. And also they're not fostering good relationships with players pretty clearly. So I think that for Deion, we're kind of testing the idea of like, how poorly can you treat kids? Because you're not Nick Saban. Nick Saban's got a reputation and, he can do things his way. Can Deion Sanders do things his way? And his way right now is not like some amazing model. It feels like he and his family are almost running this corporation that is Colorado football. And I was really off-put by those comments that Shador made, because we're talking about how weak the quarterback class is next year. And you got Shador out here being like, yeah, he must have been pretty mid because I don't remember who this kid is. Mm-hmm. That doesn't sound like a number one pick. That doesn't sound like go ahead.
That to me was much more controversial than anything Deion did, except for then when Deion came to his defense, obviously.
Basically backs it, yeah.
Yeah, Deion had to reinforce what Shedeur said, but before that, I thought that Shedeur was the one that the controversy surrounded, to be honest with you. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
It's just well, no, but that's the point, and he backs his son, so I'm kind of curious about all of this because look, you were 4-8 last year, which was better than what you were before. But you got so many glaring holes on this roster, this team. I'd be more concerned about what I've got currently than any Twitter beef and about how to improve what I have right now. And this was the big problem when he made the "I'm bringing my Louis" comment. That's kind of what that shines is that he didn't do evaluation of the roster they had. I know they were terrible, but those guys could have been meaningful depth for you. What if we watched tape on all the players we had and said, oh, this guy wasn't developed by the previous staff. So what if our staff spent time on these players, some of these players, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys, 8, whatever number you want to pick, and put time into making sure these guys could be helpful depth for Colorado because they had some stars. They just had a bunch of massive glaring holes. And I'll tell you what, guys, the one thing the Big 12 has, it may not have a talent, but a lot of really good coaching and a lot of programs that are the flip side of Colorado, Iowa State, K-State, Oklahoma State. Those schools all develop talent really well and get the most out of their players. Deion does not seem too concerned with that, and I don't think that pays dividends in this league. This league has been a development league and getting the most out of your players type league. And so if I'm I don't think this is going to go particularly well in year number 2. I think 4-8 is probably where they end up once again. So I've got some serious questions about Deion, about what he needs to do, about his long-term future, about what he's angling for. Once his kids are done, does he want to stay at Colorado or go somewhere else? Because the Sean Lewis thing was a big red flag to me. Trusting Pat Shurmur to run the offense again is a big red flag to me. And the influx and I guess redux too of guys they had is a big red flag to me as well. Some of these Big 12 schools, they've actually done a pretty good job of retaining talent. This is another massive flip. Dylan Edwards at K-State, going to K-State's a good example of this. It's just not a solid situation, and solid is what you want when you're building a program.
Yeah.
And he's not doing the solid stuff right now.
If you look across sports, Josh, in all of professional sports, there have been 4 teams in the history of sports that have gone all in on free agency and won the title, right? The Marlins did it 2 times, but that's all they could muster. The Heat did it. Right. And then a couple NBA teams did it, but it's never really happened in the NFL. And it's not really if you look at, Michigan, all the teams that have won in the transfer portal era, they have supplemented their roster through the portal. But when it comes down to it, it's mostly guys who have been there. And even if they came from the portal, they've been there for 2 or 3 years. The portal, you mentioned it perfectly, supplement, right? Complement, finish off a roster is what you want to do in the portal. Not completely put the roster in the portal's hands. And basketball is important for continuity and all that kind of stuff. Football too, though, a secondary, you want some continuity. You want guys to know each other's tendencies, things like that. And for them, I'm on board with you. It's just, this is not the way. Spurs are a good example. Drafting well. Kawhi Leonard obviously is the prime example of drafting a guy that extended the Spurs window, right? Because you brought that guy in who was such a difference maker, but they had all these guys around them, the Boris Diaws of the world, the Thiago Splitters of the world, the Patty Mills of the world. That's what free agency and college versions of the portal is for. It's not for the complete build. If you're talking about how to be consistent year in and year out, I know it's hard to be, but still it feels like the Iowa States, the K-States, the Oklahoma States, they're still building teams that direction. They're still developing talent with that direction. And Alan Bowman is a good example of this Oklahoma State. The guy is not excellent at quarterback, but you know what? He was exactly what Oklahoma State needed. And that's the guy that got out of the portal, and that's the guy who took care of them at that spot.
And that's what the portal is for. It is not for completely building. And in 1 year as an overhaul, yes, but they're not doing 1 year overhauls. Well, every year is a 1 year overhaul. It's not overhaul, develop. For them, it's overhaul now, back-to-back years. So we should be asking the questions. All right, Deion, you got all these guys, and some of them left. Now you got all these guys again. What are you doing in particular in the margins, I should say, to make it better?
Absolutely. Josh Neighbors, Big 12 Watch over on Crystal Ball College Football. Go over to that channel, like and subscribe it. Watch it when you're not watching this one. Josh does great stuff over there, and we're frequent collaborators over here.